The caption in this old stereo photograph promised the viewer a transformation by magic. When photographs first appeared in 1839, they seemed themselves to be a kind of magic, and photography was soon to become a great all-round entertainment. This is Victorian television. Almost every house had one, from the cheap hand model to the table job to the impressive piece of furniture. It's the stereoscope. Now, I wish you could see this effect, but you can't. Your screen is still too primitive to give 3D. But that's what the stereoscope gave, images in 3 dimensions. And you could even arrange the program to suit your own taste. Foreign landscapes, exotic people, the odd tableau, even a brisk under-the-counter line in naughty pictures. The Victorians loved it, and stereo cards sold in millions. The stereo effect works because each of our eyes takes a slightly different view of the same scene. The stereo card is simply 2 such photographs, one to match each eye. When looked at through a stereo viewer, they trick the brain into seeing an illusion of depth. And one item which invited exploration in depth was that bizarre garment of the 1850s, the crinoline. By letting the light shine through tinted paper, viewers even get colour. You could also look into Queen Victoria's own dining room in all its splendour. The stereo camera made the most of its ability to see in depth and amazed viewers with strange sights and grand perspectives. These are the ruins of Pompeii, the Pope in Rome blessing a crowd, and another novelty, smoke billowing from the guns of a warship fired for the benefit of the camera. More adult tastes were served discreetly. Gentlemen could buy a viewer with a locked drawer for hiding the more risky pictures. Photography was a profitable trade in the early days. Many artists gave up painting and set up as professional photographers. By the end of the 1850s, there were nearly 3,000 studios in Britain alone. Looking across the range of the new art, from the formal portraits to the cheap trick cards, one observer said, "Photography has given more pleasure to poor suffering humanity than anything else cast up in my time." And enthusiasm reached right to the top. The stereo craze in England was touched off when Victoria and Albert got one of the first viewers. And the British royal family was also to star in the next great photo craze for cheap little portraits called carte de visite. Indeed, in the week after Prince Albert's sudden death in 1861, one card company alone sold 70,000 copies of his portrait. This informal picture of Princess Alexandra giving her daughter a piggyback sold 300,000 copies. Carte de visite cameras had a number of lenses which were uncapped one at a time to give a series of poses on a single plate. You could then cut up the print and send one of the small portraits to a friend. And best of all, it was cheap. When this craze called cartomania was at its height in Britain, some 400 million cards were bought each year. Not all portraits, some pure visual fun, Victorian style. And of course, people soon needed something to put them in. A New York newspaper said in 1862, "No drawing table of the day can be considered furnished without its photographic album, and among the pretty toys of the season, few can proffer so many substantial merits." The family album was often kept by the daughters of the middle classes, housebound, underoccupied, and rather bored. Photos of friends and celebrities were cut out and pasted together into elaborate collages. In a British album, the pride of place often went to the royal family, but selling photographs of the famous had its disadvantages. A prime minister like Palmerston could no longer walk along the street unrecognized. The politicians almost had their revenge when Gladstone thought about taxing the cards. At a penny a time, he reckoned to raise £5 million. In those days, even the poet laureate Tennyson was a bestseller. This is Lewis Carroll. In the 1860s, the craze for cards began to fade, but it had encouraged a taste for photo gimmicks, which went on to put famous faces in all sorts of unlikely places. While the famous defaced the crockery, personal jewellery was being decorated with more intimate photographs of loved ones. The public's desire to see more of the world was insatiable, and companies were set up to meet the demand. The publisher of these Scottish scenes was one of the biggest, Valentine's of Dundee. Photographers ranged far across the world in search of exotic views. The popularity of these photographs of the Middle East helped Francis Frith set up another successful business, which even did well with rather commonplace scenes, like the high streets of English towns. And Frith knew how to get his money's worth from a single simple photograph. A ship sailing in the sun off Land's End can become in the darkroom a ship sailing in the moonlight off Land's End. Or the ship can be brushed away for customers who might prefer a moonlit Land's End unadorned. And even Windsor Castle got its dignity in Frith's darkroom. When the original view is revealed, it's just too cluttered to please the public. And Frith's imaginative outfit was also quick to catch the end of the century boom in picture postcards, bought by the inhabitants of what was by then the most prosperous country in the world, and the hard-working British were at last learning to enjoy themselves. These photographs of holidaymakers at Hastings were made by George Washington Wilson, who was by the 1880s doing a huge trade in tourist views. At Wilson's factory, thousands of master negatives were laid out in the sun and printed up by a staff of women workers. Beach photographers offered their services to the holidaymakers who flocked to the seaside. Photography was still seen as a mysterious, messy business, strictly for the professionals. But the people were soon to be caught up in a revolution in popular photography. The Kodak camera took photography out of the hands of the professionals and offered it to the public under the slogan, "You press the button, we do the rest." This camera was made in 1888. It's now a museum piece, and it hasn't been used for years. It isn't very sophisticated. You just look along these two lines in the top, snap, and hope for the best. So here goes. Right, do you want to stand up and get a picture taken? There we are. And this is the result. Not bad 90 years on. At 5 guineas, the Kodak was expensive, but it sold so well that mass production soon brought down the price. Okay, from here. The fixed lens of the Kodak got everything in focus from a distance of a few feet, and, as its inventor said, pictures could now be taken by anybody, man, woman or child, who has sufficient intelligence to point a box straight and press a button. The era of the snapshot had arrived. Images were no longer taken on a single plate, but on a roll which could take 100 small snaps before reloading. The whole camera was then posted off to the factory where the snaps were developed and another roll loaded. Kodak's inventor was George Eastman, an American who soon had a worldwide market. When his famous box Brownie camera appeared at the end of the century, it only cost $1 and sold 100,000 in the first year. The Americans, always keen photographers, immediately became snap happy. The snapshot in Britain also began to show the lighter side of life. Snaps became so cheap that in George Bernard Shaw's words, the photographer was like a cod which lays 1,000,000 eggs in order that one may be hatched. cheap camera encouraged ordinary people to stock up the family's memory bank for the future. Children no longer had to go through the ordeal of the portrait studio. A patch of sunshine in the backyard would now do just as well. And the new cameras were also quick to discover the excitement of the Victorian street. Many photographic clubs were formed around this time as the new cameras encouraged amateur photographers into the street. In Hastings, life in the seaside town was documented by a local man called George Wood. The new generation of photographers set free by the portable camera enjoyed the life outdoors much more than the restrictions of the studio. Just along the coast, another gentleman photographer strolled the esplanades of Brighton, snapping as he went. George Ruff's father had been a successful studio photographer in the town, but young Ruff was simply fascinated by the movement of the holidaymakers. With his portable camera and trained eye, Ruff caught a mood that now helps fix our image of England at that time. Even in more somber times, the new camera lent itself most easily to private pleasures. When a British soldier called Percy Warren was sent to fight in the Boer War, he took his camera with him. The military census in South Africa obviously had little to fear from Percy's souvenir pictures of his mates playing at soldiers. Even in war, the private camera was used selectively, like most of us use our memory, to remember the good times. These heroes of the Boer War are returning to the small Australian town of Gundagai, and this shadow belongs to the photographer, Charles Louis Gabriel, who was also the town doctor. Gabriel's photographs record the pace of life at the turn of the century in Gundagai, a town of which its own Gundagai Times wrote, "Things are so slow in Gundagai just now that we would not be surprised if creation expired before tea time." With the coming of the snapshot, the camera's view of life became much more candid and much more natural. But by the end of the 19th century, people were pretty familiar with photographs. And photographs could never be more than fragments. And people wanted pictures to tell them stories. Well, they were soon to get that, because the celluloid strip pioneered in the Kodak camera eventually led on to the moving picture. It was impossible for the still pictures to compete with the movies, but they did try. This is a photographic storybook. Now, with a few updates in style, the storyline is probably just about melodramatic enough to find a place in the television schedules today.
In the African day, a man wends his way. He digs in the mine and dreams of wealth untold. But at what a cost, for others are lost to the greed of gold, the greed of gold. Hey, you, what are you doing there? This is my title deed, I'm here by right. Give that to me or you'll be sorry. Oh, let go! Don't try to struggle. If you want to survive in the mines, you must learn to fight. England, England, my brother, swear to avenge my death. Oh, heavens, let me be your partner. The ghost! Why, what's the matter? Nothing. What's this? Nothing, nothing. Yes, this was my brother's. You killed him, and you must die. You are revenge, my brother, but I am left alone. Weep not for me. I am left alone. Weep not for me. Weep not for me. But we shall meet, for we shall meet in heaven.
In the next episode of Camera, Soldiers of the Queen, Gus MacDonald looks at the making of an empire. In an age of continual colonial warfare, British officers used the camera to record their armies making history.